When you type a search query into DuckDuckGo, you are not searching the web. When you use Bing, you are searching the web. When you use Brave Search, you are partially searching the web and partially borrowing someone else's index of the web. When you use Ecosia, you are using Bing with a different interface and a tree planting donation attached to the revenue. When you use Yahoo Search, you are using Bing. When you use Startpage, you are using Google with a privacy layer placed in front of it. There are hundreds of search engines available to you right now as alternatives to Google, and the overwhelming majority of them are not search engines in any meaningful technical sense. They are search interfaces, middlemen, resellers of search results produced by an index they did not build, cannot fully control, and are paying to access under-licensing arrangements that determine more about the quality of your search results than anything the interface layer does. The actual number of search engines that have built their own independent index of the web, meaning they send out their own crawlers, store their own copy of the web's content, and generate their own search results from their own data rather than from someone else's, is approximately 3. Google, Bing, and a much smaller independent called Mojik that most PL have never heard of. Everything else is built on top of one of these 3, usually Google or Bing, and the implications of that fact for your privacy, for the diversity of information you can access, and for the future of how humanity finds information on the are more significant and more urgent than most people who use search engines every day have ever been given reason to consider. So stay with me, because understanding this changes how you think about every search you make. Let me explain what building a search index actually involves, because understanding the scale of the infrastructure required makes the 3 number less surprising and more genuinely illuminating about why the search engine market looks the way it does. Indexing the web means sending automated programs called crawlers out across the entire internet continuously, following links from page to page, downloading the content of every page they visit, storing that content, analyzing it, and organizing it into a searchable database that can return relevant results for any query in a fraction of a second. The web contains an estimated 5 to 600 billion indexable pages, and it grows and changes continuously. Maintaining a comprehensive, current, and useful index of this content requires tens of thousands of servers operating around the clock, petabytes of storage, significant ongoing bandwidth costs, and sophisticated engineering systems for crawling, deduplication, relevance ranking, spam detection, and query processing. The annual cost of operating a major search index runs into the billions of dollars. Google has spent decades and tens of billions of dollars building its index and the infrastructure surrounding it. Microsoft has done the same with Bing, investing heavily over many years to build an index capable of competing meaningfully with Google across the full range of search queries users perform. These are not products that can be replicated by a well-funded startup in a few years. They are infrastructure projects of a scale that only a handful of organizations on Earth could finance and sustain. And the barrier to entry this creates is the fundamental reason why only 3 independent indexes exist. Mojik, the 3rd independent index, deserves specific attention because it is both the most important and the least known of the 3. Mojik is a British search company that has been quietly building its own web index since 2004 and currently maintains an index of several billion pages that it has crawled and stored independently. It is the only search engine in the world that can credibly claim to offer search results that are neither Google results nor Bing results, which makes it uniquely valuable for anyone who cares about genuine diversity in the information they can access through search. The quality and comprehensiveness of Mojik's results are not yet at Google or Bing's level for all query types, particularly for obscure or highly specific queries where the smaller index size creates gaps that the larger indexes do not have. But the existence of Mojik as a genuinely independent alternative matters far more than its current quality level, because it represents the only existing proof that a 3rd independent search index is possible to build and sustain outside the Google and Microsoft duopoly. Now let me explain what this actually means for every search engine you use that is not one of these 3, because this is where the practical implications become most relevant to your daily life. When you use DuckDuckGo, your search query is sent to Bing, results are returned from Bing's index, and DuckDuckGo applies its own filtering, ranking adjustments, and privacy protections before displaying the results to you. DuckDuckGo is genuinely privacy protecting in the sense that it does not build a personal profile associated with your searches and does not use your search history for advertising targeting. That privacy protection is real and valuable, but the results you receive are ultimately derived from Bing's understanding of the web, which means they reflect Bing's decisions about what content to index, what content to rank highly, what content to exclude, and how to handle the inevitable judgment calls that arise when content conflicts with platform policies or commercial relationships. When you use Start Page, the same dynamic applies to Google rather than Bing. Start Page's privacy protections are genuine, but the results come from Google's index with all of Google's embedded decisions about the web baked into them. This creates a situation that has profound implications for the diversity of information accessible through search. When Google makes a decision about how to handle a particular category of content, that decision affects not only Google search, but also every search engine that licenses Google's results. When Bing makes a decision about what content to crawl or how to rank a particular type of website, that decision ripples through every Bing-dependent search product in the market. The hundreds of search engines that appear to offer diversity of choice in how you access information are mostly offering diversity of interface over a fundamentally limited diversity of underlying information. You are looking at the same web through different windows rather than accessing genuinely different perspectives on what the web contains. The concentration of search indexing in two dominant players also creates specific and significant risks around information access and censorship that deserve to be named directly. Both Google and Bing operate under the laws and regulatory pressures of the jurisdictions in which they operate, and both have made decisions about content removal, content demotion, and indexing policy that reflect political, legal, and commercial pressures from governments and major advertisers. When these decisions are made at the index level, they affect every search product built on top of that index simultaneously. A researcher using DuckDuckGo for privacy reasons may believe they are accessing a more neutral or independent view of the web than Google provides, but if the content they are looking for has been removed from Bing's index for any reason, DuckDuckGo's privacy protections are entirely irrelevant to whether that content is accessible through their search. The privacy layer and the content access layer are separate questions, and conflating them leads to a false sense of diversity and independence in search that the underlying infrastructure does not actually support. The advertising dimension of this concentration adds another layer of concern that goes beyond information access into the economics of the entire content creation ecosystem. Google's search advertising business is the primary revenue source for a significant portion of the web's professional content creators. When Google changes how it ranks content, when it adjusts which types of results receive prominent placement, when it introduces features like AI-generated answer summaries that reduce the number of users who click through to the original content. These decisions affect the economic viability of content creation at a scale that no other single entity in the information ecosystem approaches. Publishers, journalists, researchers, and independent content creators across every field have their economic fate substantially determined by decisions made by a single company operating a single search index. This level of concentration in the infrastructure of information access has no parallel in any other media ecosystem, and its long-term implications for the diversity and quality of information available on the web are genuinely concerning to anyone who has thought carefully about where it leads. Bing's position in this landscape is worth examining specifically because Microsoft's role in the search duopoly receives less scrutiny than Google's, despite being equally consequential. Bing is the index that most of the privacy-focused search alternatives are built on, which means that Microsoft's decisions about content indexing, content ranking, and search policy have direct and largely unacknowledged effects on users of DuckDuckGo, Ecosia, Brave Search's Bing, Derived Results, and many others. Microsoft has made content decisions with Bing that have drawn criticism in various contexts and jurisdictions, and these decisions have propagated through the entire ecosystem of Bing-dependent search products without those products' users necessarily being aware that the content gaps they might encounter reflect Microsoft's decisions rather than the independent judgment of the privacy-focused product they chose to use. The opacity of this relationship between index providers and search interface products is a genuine information gap that most users of search alternatives have never had reason to investigate. The question of what this means practically for how you should approach search in 2026 has several components that are worth addressing specifically. The first is to understand clearly what you're actually getting from the search product you use, which requires knowing which underlying index it draws from. DuckDuckGo draws primarily from Bing with some supplementary sources. StartPage draws from Google. Brave Search uses a hybrid of its own developing index and Bing results, with a proportion of independent results growing over time as Brave's crawling infrastructure expands. Cogni draws from multiple sources, including Bing, and its own developing index, which it draws exclusively from its own independent index. Understanding this dependency map does not tell you which search engine to use, but it does tell you what kind of diversity you're actually accessing when you choose between them, and that knowledge is more useful than the marketing language most of these products use to describe their independence. The situation I have described is not one with an easy or obvious solution, and I want to be honest about that, rather than ending with a simple recommendation that understates the complexity of the problem. The economics, so, have produced a 3-index search landscape are structural rather than accidental, and the barriers to building a 4th genuinely independent index are real enough that no well-funded effort has successfully scaled a competitor index to Google or Bing's level despite years of trying. What exists as a practical response is a combination of using genuinely independent alternatives where they are available and adequate, understanding clearly what you're actually using when you choose a privacy-focused search product built on a major index, and paying attention to the developing independent options that represent the only realistic path toward a less concentrated search infrastructure over a longer time horizon. The concentration of web indexing in 3 entities is one of the most significant and least discussed structural features of the information environment. Most people navigate every single day. Knowing it exists is the minimum requirement for thinking clearly about the information you access through search and the decisions that shape what that information contains. Subscribe for ongoing coverage of the infrastructure of the information ecosystem and what it means for the way you find, evaluate, and trust what you read online.